Okay, well, thank you everybody for joining the July Town Hall. We've got a good audience here at TSA headquarters, and I'm sure a good audience online. What I'd like to do for this town hall, and I'd say this every time, but I'm really going to try to do it hard this time, is I want to leave more time for your questions. So I've got some things I want to communicate to you. I will try to get through those things that are very important, though, and I think you'll like, in particular, one of them. But I hope you like all of them. But they're really good stuff, and I'll get through them fast so we can have time for Q&A, because I get a lot of value out of that. I know the team here does, and hopefully you do as well. Let me first recognize we've got NAC 6 in the house. So off to my left, and Ryan, if you could just pan over to the group from our National Advisory Council 6 version, and I had the opportunity to sit down with them this morning before I went up to Capitol Hill, and they're doing great work for all of us, and so I really appreciate your volunteer efforts. And I got to tell you that we had a whole bunch of information to communicate this morning, and one of the most organized briefs that I've had. You all went through, got me the information that you wanted to get to me, and got some feedback from me, and I appreciate all your work in arranging that, and all your work, of course, over the course of the past week. We also have members of the Human Capital Advisory Group here as well. So 2 key advisory groups for human capital and for the entire organization, quite frankly. And so I appreciate everybody making the effort to come into Washington, D.C. For some of you, it's the first time in this headquarters building. We've now been here, kind of hard to believe, almost 2 years, but it still seems very new to all of us. And I know because of the pandemic and the lack of travel during the pandemic, fewer people have been to our headquarters than we normally would see in our headquarters. But I think and hope that that will gradually resolve itself over the course of the next couple of months. I'd like to start off with some really good news, and I think many of you might have already seen it. As you know, we've been working very hard on pay equity in the FY23, the next fiscal year's budget. The president put in a proposal to provide pay equity for the TSA workforce, every single person in the TSA workforce, that would provide basically 3/4 of your funding. And as you all saw, and we've been, I think, very forward-leaning in providing communications out to the entire workforce, because we want you to be as informed as possible as to how this is proceeding along. But the House took action earlier, and always does. In an appropriations process, the House almost always acts first. The House looked at it, they agreed with pay equity, they agreed with our numbers calculations. They came back and said, we don't think we'll have a full appropriations bill for the government passed in time for 3/4 year implementation, so they funded half-year implementation. So that basically means the House said, hey, we agree with you. We think it's more realistic in terms of implementation to implement it on the 1st of April, because it's unlikely we're going to have a budget passed certainly by the 1st of October, and maybe not even before the beginning of the calendar year. So just today, we got word of the Senate's action. So the way it works is it goes to the House first, originates there. The Senate is mindful of what the House did, and then the Senate Appropriations Committees make their own recommendations on the budget. So the Senate came back today, this afternoon, also agreed with pay equity. What they said was, hey, we think probably just 1/4 year implementation is realistic in fiscal 23. But what that means in the process is, like I said, House goes first, Senate follows, and then they're almost always different on a number of items in any agency's budget. And then they get together with those differences and reconcile them in what's called a conference committee. So I expect over the next couple of months, we'll see conference committee action. And generally, conference committees stay within the bounds of the lower mark and the higher mark. So we're between 1/4 implementation and 2/4 implementation. But that's very good news, because that means that we get pay equity in fiscal 23, and it also means that pay equity is now embedded into our continuing appropriations in fiscal 24 and beyond. So we'll continue to keep you updated on it. I would caveat a couple things. One is, we see the marks. We don't know what the conference action is going to be. And so this is still not approved, so don't think it's approved yet. But what I want you to know is kind of where it's progressing, how we're doing on it, so that your expectations are appropriately managed as we go forward with this. And know, too, that Pat Bradshaw and the CFO shop will work incredibly hard once this gets approved, if it does, it's still an if, to get it in place within 90 days of implementation of appropriations bill, and we'd have to look at the language as to what specific date they choose for implementation. So super good news. I would just like to read you too a quote from the Senate committee. They said, quote, "The committee lauds TSA's efforts to achieve pay equity for its workforce, especially in improving pay for frontline TSOs." So that's in the report language. Like I've said to you in prior conversations, in my conversations with members up on the Hill, there is widespread support for this. I've hardly met anybody that is not in support of it. They're in support of it for a number of reasons, but key amongst those reasons is because they appreciate the work that the TSA workforce does. And I've said to you many times in the past that the frontline screening workforce in particular has more influence on our reputation within the country and internationally than any other group of people in this agency. And so I specifically want to call you out for doing such a terrific job representing us so well, so that when this proposal comes up, people are inclined to support it rather than inclined to ask questions and maybe or maybe not support it. So far so good, but again, not guaranteed, and we'll keep you updated. The other thing I want to talk to you about was something that we did in remembrance of 9/11. On the 20th anniversary of 9/11 up in New York City, the NYPD presented a 9/11 flag to the Secretary of Homeland Security. And the Secretary brought it back to Washington, D.C., and decided that it would be very appropriate if each component of the department had possession of the flag for a month, and took the flag and flew it over different elements of their component. And so our month was June. And what we did was we raised the flag first here at our headquarters here in Springfield. And then we traveled with the flag to the 4 9/11 airports. So Portland, Maine, Boston, Logan Airport, Dulles Airport, and Newark Airport. So it's been to the 4 9/11 airports. Then we took it to TSIF, to the Transportation Security Integration Facility by Ronald Reagan Airport, out to the TSOC, which is out by Dulles Airport, Transportation Security Operations Center, over to Union Station to represent our responsibility for surface transportation security. Then it went overseas, first to London and then to Frankfurt, Germany, because we have a significant international presence and a significant international level of influence. And then to our key training centers. So it went up to Atlantic City for where we do primarily FAMS training, down to the Canine Training Center in San Antonio, and then down to our TSA Academy in FLETC. And it's gone to a couple of other places, but I wanted to hit the ones that most people would remember and recognize and associate with 9/11. When the flag goes through all the components, the flag and photos representing its journey around the Department of Homeland Security over the past year will be at DHS headquarters, and that will be brought out at every 9/11 anniversary that the department does. So really very appropriate way to recognize the 20th anniversary of 9/11. It's particularly important, of course, to TSA because our agency was founded because of 9/11, and we are also at our 20th anniversary. So, and I think it's just something within our workforce, and I hear this as I travel around the country, when I hold town halls at airports and in FAM field offices, and with our legal staffs and other staffs that we have throughout the United States, and then our attaches overseas, that, hey, for folks that were old enough to experience 9/11, to be alive, see it happen, sometimes be nearby, where it happened, we have a number of people in TSA that were at ground zero on 9/11, that the concern is that we as an agency never lose focus on why we do what we do. And you'll see us reemphasize that on occasion, because sometimes people think that we're in place to enforce all laws. We're a counterterrorism agency, and we're in place to prevent a terrorist attack on our transportation system. So I think it's particularly important that we recognize this every 9/11. We will have another ceremony here in our headquarters, but also at the department, and representing all the components and where that flag has traveled over the past year. Next thing I'd like to talk about for a moment is our summer operations. I think, and I think all of you would agree, we've got a number of FSDs in the audience here today. TSA has done a superb job during the summer, going from spring break through Memorial Day, through 4th of July, and now into the second half of the summer. I'm really, really proud of what we've been able to do, recognizing that we don't have the full staff that we would desire to have either, and knowing full well that that has fallen on the backs of our people to make sure that we can perform the security mission that we will always perform, and we can do so in a manner that provides the movement of people through our transportation system. This has been no small achievement at all. It's always a challenge in the summer. It's been a particular challenge this summer. And so I just really want to take at the very front end of this town hall the opportunity to thank all of you for all that you've done. It's our frontline TSOs, our federal air marshals, our inspectors, our FSD staffs, our intelligence analysis staff, all our vetting teams. I mean, this has been a big, big lift for all of us. We've had the busiest day since the pandemic recovery during the 4th of July weekend. We're seeing now across our system, pretty much every day is over 2 million passengers per day, and we expect to see that certainly for the next several weeks, and then it will start to, of course, once we round Labor Day, trail off a bit, but then we're in no time flat into the Thanksgiving and the December holidays. In addition to providing the security work that we do in airports around the country, we have a number of our colleagues who continue to support Operation Allies Welcome. We are still welcoming Afghan refugees that supported the United States back into this country, and that's a really, really important mission and very carefully done under the leadership of our department. And then also we've been asked, as we have in the past, to support the Southwest border operations that Customs and Border Protection and Immigration and Customs Enforcement are performing. This is really important work. I've been down to the border many times, and my own observation is it is a very, very challenging mission, and the Border Patrol and the Customs officers there aren't enough of them to handle the volume without significant support from across the department. We're a very large component in the department. The one difference we made this year was I asked that we not send our TSOs down to the Southwest border, given the pandemic recovery and our staffing shortages. While not big in numbers, they can be big in numbers at certain airports. Overall, not a huge number, but still big in some airports and very impactful. So I appreciate everybody that's deployed down to the Southwest border. I can tell you, and you know too, if you deployed, how much the Border Patrol in particular appreciates the support you provide, because really it stands for the proposition that Border Patrol agents are particularly trained to handle individuals that come across our border between the ports of entry. And we want to make sure that we use their training for that purpose and then augment their work with law enforcement support through our Federal Air Marshal Service in and around where Border Patrol stations are, and then administrative support to help them process thousands of migrants that cross our border every day. So I appreciate everybody who has participated in those operations while we've been conducting our operations in a very, very busy summer. The other thing I'd like to highlight, and really I've mentioned this before, but it's somewhat of a new responsibility for TSA in terms of our actions. It's not new in terms of what we've been tasked to do by law for the past 20 years. But the threat changed with cybersecurity over the past year. We all remember the ransomware attack on one of our major pipelines here on the East Coast a little over a year ago. And once that happened, TSA worked very, very quickly to put a security directive in place to require reporting of cyber incidents, the designation of a point of contact, vulnerability assessments by certain pipeline companies, and that was followed up about a year ago with some very specific measures that we asked those pipeline companies to perform. And of course, cybersecurity is not just limited to pipeline, oil and natural gas pipeline companies. We are also concerned about rail, so it's freight rail, transit rail, and passenger rail, as well as aviation, airports, and airlines. So we've done an awful lot of work over the past year, and I just wanted to highlight something that we did just last week, actually. But the work to do this has been in place for many, many months. And in our directives in the past, a year ago when we first issued our first directives to do very specific activities to protect systems from a cyber attack, we basically changed the approach after a lot of learning over the past year, both on our behalf and on the companies that we regulated's behalf, and with a lot of collaboration, a lot of learning on both our sides. we changed our approach from, rather than requiring specific things that they needed to do, to instead go to more of a performance-based model where we lay out the security outcomes that we think are necessary based on the threat that we're seeing in the intelligence information. And so we lay out the security outcomes, and we ask the companies to come back to us within 90 days to tell us specifically how they're going to achieve the security outcomes we've laid out. So this allows us to be outcome focused and also allows the companies to tailor their approach to their businesses. And I think it's a far superior approach. I know it provides better security at the end of the day. And part of that process is the companies or owners and operators, because some are operated by governments, they need to come back and tell us how they're going to measure the achievement of those outcomes so that we can definitively say, as we evaluate their performance, that, hey, our cybersecurity posture in this particular sector of the transportation sector is indeed stronger as a result of the actions that everybody's taken, and we can rapidly adapt to changes as the threat changes. But I'd just like to highlight our policy shop that did the writing and the drafting and the coordination of putting these security directives together. Our operations shop that does a lot of the engagement with surface transportation entities and aviation entities, and really ensures that collaboration and that compliance work is done as we would expect. And also, a relatively new entity in TSA, our regional security directors. Some of you might remember that about 4 years ago, we had regional directors that were in place to coordinate regional operations from an aviation perspective. We changed that in consonance with our new strategy to put regional security directors in place that focused not on aviation but on surface transportation security. So we had a specific focus on surface with 5 regional security directors, and they and their teams have done a great job in working with these companies and ensuring that there is good communications back and forth, and certainly really good compliance with our directives as they come into force. The other organization I'd like to recognize is, and oftentimes doesn't get enough credit for the great work that they do, is our Intelligence and Analysis Office here in headquarters and throughout TSA. I mean, basically the predicate for our security directives is the intelligence information we have. And it's very important, and we've always had this best practice, I consider, in government, in that we share as much intelligence information as we can at the appropriate levels of classification with the folks that are secured, have the security clearances in the private sector, to really understand, hey, we now understand more fully why it is that we need to do what you're asking us to do as quickly as you're asking us to do it, because it does affect national security and definitely homeland security. So I appreciate operational support, security operations, and intelligence analysis work in supporting us in this effort. And I think, as you've seen in the media coverage of our new security directive, there has been very positive reviews of taking the approach of going to a performance-based model rather than requiring everybody to do the same things across an entire critical infrastructure subsector. This week I had the opportunity to travel. I was traveling Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, and I'd just like to share with you a couple things that happened this week that are very reflective of the great performance of the TSA workforce. I always in town halls talk about the bright spots, because as I travel around the agency and I interact with the men and women that we work with every day, I always leave those engagements very, very impressed with the professionalism and the dedication, the commitment of the men and women that form TSA. So this week, as I was traveling to Sandia National Lab in Albuquerque, New Mexico, that was on Monday. And on Monday in the morning, at 11 o'clock in the morning, Dallas time, there was an active shooter incident at Dallas Love Airport. And this active shooter incident ran from about 11 o'clock in the morning to almost 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And it only ended after the individual was apprehended and after the law enforcement officers at Dallas Love Airport and our federal air marshals conducted a sweep of the terminal and determined that it was safe to repopulate. What our team did, widely reported in the media, and this is why training is so important because you just never know when something like this is going to happen, unfortunately, nowadays. An individual was on the public side near a ticket counter, pulled out a weapon, started firing shots into the ceiling. And our team at Dallas Love immediately got everybody to shelter in place. And they did a lot of very quick things like, delaying the second shift. Second shift was inbound. Just getting in contact with all the second shift employees and saying, hey, don't come into the airport, stay back. Our checkpoint was closed for a couple of hours. Fortunately, there were no TSA injuries in this active shooter incident at all. The FAA had instituted a ground stop for about an hour and a half, so pretty significant impact on the air traffic in the Dallas area. And again, I just think that training is key, but also leadership is very key to this. And leadership, as I've said before, manifests itself at every level of any high-performing organization. And so I just commend the leadership of all the TSOs at the checkpoint who knew what to do and did the right thing and were very clear in their direction to passengers who understandably did know what to do and certainly wanted to be safe. I commend the leadership of the Federal Security Director, Amy Williams, at Dallas Love. She's been very focused on making sure that we can respond on an instant's notice to what might happen, and she and her team were just terrific. And also to recognize, because one of the key strengths of TSA and the work that we do is we form very, very strong partnerships across the board. And I don't go to a single location where I see that we don't have a partnership. We always have partnerships, and all those partnerships are always positive. And at Dallas Love, it was the Dallas PD, the Dallas airport staff, and because this occurred at a carrier's ticketing counter, that carrier was very much involved with this. So, just really lots of very positive comments on TSA's performance. Everybody was safe in our workforce, and I just really appreciate the example that the Dallas team set for all of us, and the reinforcement that we need to make sure that everybody, anywhere, is able to do what they did. Also, as I traveled from Dallas down to Albuquerque, went to Sandia. At Sandia National Labs, we talked about open architecture, which is a direction that we are proceeding for all of our transportation security equipment technology investments. It's going to be a significant benefit to us in operational flexibility, and also a benefit to any of the one-stop agreements that we want to put in place internationally. But after we left Sandia, and we also talked about some machine learning work there, left Sandia, went up to Chicago O'Hare. And at Chicago O'Hare, we had just a great town hall with a lot of people from the airport, our FSD staff, our TSOs, federal air marshals, inspectors, the whole team was there. Really good exchange back and forth. A couple things that they highlighted for me that I thought were really, really positive that I would just offer to you to think about. One of them is they've put together a TSO Olympics. And there are some airports. We have downstate Illinois participates in this, Washington Dulles. So when I was out at Washington Dulles, I got a brief from them on Monday on our outbound leg of how they're participating and how proud they were of some of their TSOs that got to the final round. The TSA in the state of Hawaii, Indiana, Wisconsin, Chicago Midway, and of course, Chicago Airport. Just a great way to kind of bring people together, reinforce training, do it in a fun way, but be able to up our bar on a professional basis. And one of the things, the final competition is going to be between the 23rd and 25th of August. I think it's great. And one of the things we talked about was maybe transitioning that to an Administrator's Cup Challenge in the future years. I mean, just a way to get everybody involved and have fun with it. But it helps level things across the agency too, so that we see what the levels of performance are and bring everybody up to a very high level. The second thing I saw was something called the Windy City Canine Challenge. And so this is our canine handlers got together and had kind of three elements of their challenge. One was just basic handler knowledge. The other was canine first aid skills. And the third was explosive detection, a key reason for our canine detection teams. And the airports that participated in that are Portland, Oregon, Phoenix, Dallas, Chicago O'Hare, Midway, Detroit, Jacksonville, and Orlando. So these are really things that, I look at in TSA and think, hey, this is fantastic because we've got individuals that are self-starting, putting something together, trying to make sure that we get better as an organization, and really just highlighting when, hey, to win something like this is a pretty darn significant achievement. So I just offer those to you as two really good examples. And I'd just like to thank Scott Johnson, who is the Federal Security Director at Washington Dulles, Derek Stark, our Federal Security Director at Chicago O'Hare, and then John Allen as I went through Albuquerque, and we were actually in Albuquerque for 6 hours. So from time of landing to the time of departure was a total of 6 hours. But his team was terrific and got a chance to interact with them. And then John is the acting FSD at Albuquerque. He's actually the Federal Security Director in Charleston, West Virginia. So I really appreciate John and his team's hospitality as we whiz through Albuquerque, New Mexico. Other thing I'd like to emphasize is that July is Unity Month, and at every town hall I talk about diversity and inclusion, and I'll have much more to say about that hopefully in September. And I hope to introduce to you then our new Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer, which we are very far along on bringing a person on board that will do a terrific job, no doubt, in this new assignment. But the theme of Unity Month is Unity, Inclusion, Everyone Matters, and I think that says it all. I mean, when I think of how I want to be treated and how I want everybody else to be treated, I want everybody to feel that I matter, that I add value, that I am part of this team and I'm always included. I'm never excluded. So I thank all those that supported Unity Month and really demonstrated our commitment to a diverse and inclusive work environment. The other thing that I would highlight, and Alexa Lopez is standing in the back of the room, she and her team, I think, have done a phenomenal job in communicating not just externally the TSA mission performance and the great work that all of you do day in and day out, but she's also done a great job with her team in communicating internally. And so I'd invite you, if you haven't been on the iShare page, the landing page for TSA, when you click in, the first page you land on, just go on it and kind of look at all of the highlights that Alexa and her team put together about the really terrific work that men and women in TSA do every single day. There's photos, stories that are there. I like it because I get up in the morning, I'm drinking my cup of coffee, and I like to feel good in the morning. So the first thing I do is I click on that site and I go, hey, what's happened that really highlights the men and women of this agency and the really terrific work they do. So Alexa, thank you and your team for highlighting that to us. We have lots of great input, but I would always encourage anybody in TSA, if you have a colleague, you don't need to be a federal security director or a supervisory federal air marshal in charge of an office. If you have a colleague that's done something that you think merits recognition, just shoot it to SCPA, and they'll look at it and potentially include it in what everybody can see. Because I think that's one of the joys of working in an operational agency like this that's so big and has such reach across the country, is to just really see, hey, what great things that are going on that we don't always see in our normal operational reporting. And so this is really just a nice supplement. So you supplement all of that with the great operational work that's there, and it's a winning combination. So appreciate Alexa again, and then all the work that people are doing to provide that great content so that we can share it with everybody. So at this point, I'll stop talking, and I think I've been pretty close to what I said, and I will turn it over to questions. So we can take questions from the audience here, and we can take questions certainly from everybody online. So let's start with the audience here first. And if you could come up to the mic so that people on the online can hear you. All right. And if you could just introduce yourself too, that would be great. Thanks.
I'm Pat Caldarella. I'm a CSO from LaGuardia Airport. I'm part of the National Advisory Council, sitting over there. I'm also the newly elected vice chair of the executive committee, which our council is divided into 3 different committees. So my question.
Okay, so that's better, I guess. I probably will start over because I don't think the external audience didn't hear. Good afternoon. My name is Pat Caldarella. I'm a TSO from LaGuardia Airport, New York City. I'm also a member of the National Advisory Council, who are sitting over there. And I'm also the Executive Vice Chair, newly elected, of that council. We're divided into 3 committees. I'm on the Executive Committee. A question that has come to mind is TSA has recently begun providing self-defense training to airline flight crew or cabin crew, and we're wondering if something like that, judging by the way things are happening these days, if something like that in a limited fashion could be perhaps supplied to us.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, Pat, and I appreciate the question. Being the first person up is always tough too, so I appreciate your leadership in that regard. But that's a really good idea, and as many of you know, we are expanding our TSA Academy by an additional week in the upcoming fiscal year, and that entire 3rd week is really about how do you de-escalate situations. We could build in how do you defend yourself as well, and also more acculturation into TSA as an organization to really understand those 9/11 aspects that I talked about, the reason why we do what we do, and why it's so important that we always stay on the leading edge so that we're always ready. So thank you, appreciate it. Okay, so we'll come back to the internal audience when we go to those online.
Okay, sir. First question. Will you reinstate behavior detection officers in light of the Dallas incident?
We are legislatively prohibited from having dedicated BDOs. I've always said that I think the BDO, the behavior detection officer functionality, is critical to our success. We do train folks as they go through their academy curricula on behavior detection techniques and also at the airports. The idea was to, rather than having a separate cadre to be compliant with the law, was to have basic behavior detection capability across every person that's in our frontline operations. So at this point, and we will always reevaluate things. Every time there's a situation or there's information that indicates to us that there could be a situation that develops, I always want to make sure that we are as well trained as we possibly can be. And a key part of my job is to look forward and to look at what those emerging threats are to make sure we're positioned ahead of them before they appear.
Thank you, sir. Next question. Why are fully trained TSA support staff now being precluded from working TDC? This really frees up a valuable TSO to conduct screening operations during heavy pushes.
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. And the TDC is a screening position. As I look at the TDC position, I think it's one of the most critical functions that we perform. And I think it's very, very important. As you're having a passenger approach the screening checkpoint, all passengers now that travel at all know that they're going to see a uniformed TSA transportation security officer at that checkpoint. And so I think it's important that the first encounter they have is with that which they recognize, because I know passengers derive a lot of comfort from knowing that, hey, this is a fully certified transportation security officer. So there's that. There's the criticality of that position, because if the TDC makes an error, then everything else that we do becomes to a degree in jeopardy. I mean, if somebody gets put in the wrong screening lane, we're not able to apply the right level of screening to that individual. The other thing to think about is that in airport security systems around the world, we're one of the very few countries that actually knows who's in our system and verifies their identity before they're able to conduct screening. And as all of our officers know, now we have the capability with the credential authentication technology deployed that we can see in real time what their risk status is. So if there's any change between the time that they were last online or using an app and the time they show up in front of our TDC, that we can see that. So I feel that is a very critical function, and I want to make sure that we put individuals that have been fully trained in our security operations at the front of the line.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And speaking of technology, when can we expect all airports to receive the CTs at the checkpoints?
Yeah, great question. I wish I could say soon, but we get we'll get about $100 million a year in our appropriations process. So if you look at what's, I talked about the pay equity action on the House and the Senate. I also look at the capital investment action on the House and the Senate, and it's about $100 million or so for CT systems. We can install more than that. We feel that we could spend almost $300 million a year and be able to purchase and to install CT systems. I would like to be able to do that. I just don't have the funding flexibility right now to be able to do that. I would also highlight that this CT acquisition is critically important. A lot of people look at it and say, okay, it's a new upgraded X-ray, and for passengers, they don't have to remove as many things from the carry-on bag in the future, and for our officers, that it provides a much better and much higher fidelity display. All that's true, but what that sometimes misses is the CT technology can detect things in a carry-on bag at a much higher level than the current AT technology. So from a mission perspective and closing any security gaps, it's important that we do this as quickly as we can. And as I mentioned at the very beginning, I was talking to the National Advisory Council this morning, and I left there and went up to Capitol Hill and met with a member of the Senate. And one of the things I talked with him about was that very topic. First was pay equity, and the second was, hey, we need to invest in our capital infrastructure and do it at a higher rate than what we're doing today. It's just limited by our overall budget numbers.
Along those lines, regarding pay equity, can you explain the funding that the House and Senate agreed upon? I believe you stated that the House agreed for 3/4 funding and the Senate agreed for 1. What does this actually mean?
Yeah, no, so let me make sure we have the quarters right. The President's budget was for 3/4 year funding. The House approved 2/4 of funding. The Senate just approved 1/4 of funding. And what that means is a quarter is 3 months. Every fiscal year is broken into 4 quarters, so a quarter is 3 months. And so if you look at the President's budget, that proposed a 1 January start to the payment of, to the beginning of pay equity, to where we're funded for pay equity. The House started on the 1st of April, and the Senate just proposed the 1st of July. The most important thing here is that we get it in place in fiscal 23. Because if it gets in place in fiscal 23, it's in place forever. And so my focus has been, and if you watched any of the hearings that I participated in over the last month and a half, what I always focus on is we can't do pay equity until we get the money. I need the money. And what the Senate and the House are saying is, hey, we don't think we're going to have an appropriations bill for you in time for a 3/4 year or the 1st of January implementation. We think we'll probably get all of this work done across the entire government for their appropriations. The House is thinking about halfway through the year, and the Senate's thinking about 3/4 of the way through the year. It's just really reassuring to me, and hopefully to all of you, that there's recognition that we need to fix this, and there's commitment to put significant amounts of money towards that effort. It's, when you get into full year implementation, which will be in fiscal 24, that's about $1.5 billion more than what we currently pay. So it is a big amount of money.
Thank you. There is a rumor that pay equity is only going to be implemented for the screening workforce. When we do get the money, can you clarify if pay equity will truly be for all agency employees?
Both the House mark and the Senate mark have it for all employees, consistent with what we asked. We asked for all employees. That's not to say they couldn't change it later on, but late in this process. But we asked for all employees because, heck, when you think about it, you shouldn't be partially equitable. You should be fully equitable, right? So when we see pay discrepancies, they exist with the Federal Air Marshal Service. Not quite at the level with the screening workforce, but still pretty significant gap in pay all the way up the line. So my position all along has been pay equity applies to every person in TSA. And so far it's been supported.
Thank you, sir. Next question. At some airports, officers are being required to work at least one of their RDOs. If they are unable to come in, they are being issued letters of counseling and possible disciplinary actions. Where is the rationale with this agency action?
Yeah, the rationale is that we need to staff our screening checkpoints to meet our standards of security effectiveness and for security efficiency. And so we know, and Security Ops does a fantastic job with determining what the overall staffing needs to be at airports. And then federal security directors every single day, along with the TSMs and the STSOs and the FSDs for screening, also do a terrific job in figuring out what staffing they need in particular lanes or particular checkpoints. And so if you're asked to work an additional day, it's not because we want you to work an additional day just to want you to work. It's because we need you there. And it's really important when you have periods of high passenger volume to not have officers it's important not to short staff the screening operations if you can avoid it. And I know, fully aware that, hey, having to do that over a period of an entire summer, that is hard. Fully recognize that. We've tried to recognize that in terms of the pay incentives that we put in place. And just know that whatever pay incentives we put in place right now clears out the bank account for us, right? There's not money that we have left over. We're basically spending everything we can because we appreciate the work that everybody's doing. But this is one of those times when the mission requires that we bring people in beyond what they would normally work.
Thank you, sir. Will Viera be offered to non-SCS employees in 2023? Security Ops just announced, but will other offices get the opportunity as well?
We look at that all the time, and we make decisions based on what we think is in the best interest of the agency in the long term. And so we will always look at the Viera opportunities, and you'll see the announcements when we make decisions when those opportunities are going to be available. And I don't know, Darby or Pat, anything you want to add to that? Okay.
I think you nailed it, sir. I mean, I don't have anything else to add. I mean, it's been pretty consistent every year we've done this. There's certain parts of security operations that are eligible, certain parts that are not. I think it's fairly consistent with what the other offices are doing as well.
Thank you. With the proposed automatic advancement of officers to F-band and elimination of the LTSO position, what is planned for MSTIs?
Yeah, the ladder, that's called a ladder. So if you go from GS5 to GS7 to GS9 equivalents, or DEF in our pay banding system, and you have automatic promotions without competition after a year successful service in each one of those bands. That's a ladder, and we designed that ladder specifically for the TSOs to ensure that there was progression up through the levels of TSOs all the way to what's now called a lead TSO. We're still working on how we will designate TSOs, because we could have potentially TSOs that are F bands. Some might be leads and some might not. So we're still working our way through that. And Darby, anything, you got to come up to the mic that you want to add to that? Yeah, thanks.
I should pull one of the FSDs up on the H. I should pull one of the FSDs up here because I know they talked about this today as part of the HCAG group. But I don't think any of the conversations have been also about eliminating an LTSO. The pay ladders might be different, but we recognize a lead TSO is a pretty critical leadership position in the workforce. So we've not had any conversations about eliminating a position. It's all about where those ladders are going to be when it cuts over on the pay. But any of the HCAG members, did I leave anything out, Mark or Aaron or anybody else?
No, I think you're right. It's still in discussion, but no elimination.
Yeah.
I think it's, Darby, I think without.
You gotta come to the mic.
You got to come to the mic. Yeah.
You gotta go there.
So Aaron Batt, FSD out of Indiana, and also one of the co-leads of the Human Capital Advisory Group. Had an opportunity with the NAC, also with Pat Bradshaw and her team today, and Tom Reagan, talking about this issue. We've been talking about it for a couple of weeks. I think at this point we had provided a recommendation to go to the steering committee, one in which would say, I think most people all agree that The lead position is critical. The functionality that they perform is one in which we want to continue. Achieving the F-band based on time and status doesn't necessarily eliminate the ability to have a competitive process for the lead position. So I think those are all things that almost everyone I spoke with all agreed upon. I think the piece that we'll have to work through the steering committee and then decision of the administrator will be, how do you distinguish the difference from a pay process, whether that's a step increase as you become an F-band to then become an LTSO or something different. So I think the value of the position is recognized, and that's something that I think everyone that we spoke with wants to continue.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks, Darby. Yeah, so function is still there. We're still working through a number of things, as we've said in prior town halls. I mean, there are a number of things as we implement pay equity that we need to resolve. We've had a lot of good input from men and women across the agency of, hey, this is my situation. I've gone into your calculator. I'm concerned at what the number is when it comes out. How is this going to work for me? And that's highlighted some policy decisions that we need to make that we will be making over the next couple of months, well in advance of pay equity being implemented. The other thing I would add, too, is that if you're functionally a lead TSO, and irrespective of where you are in the band, and we haven't really made that decision yet, but what you said makes a lot of sense to me. That also, I would think, makes you more competitive for promotion to supervisor. Yep.
Thank you, sir. In terms of speaking about career ladders, what are your plans to foster FSD staff to grow and develop as leaders?
Yeah, really great question, and one of the things that we are going to take a look at over the course of the next year is FSD staffing levels and FSD career progression. When we did career progression for TSOs a couple of years ago, one of the things we stated when we did that was, hey, we're starting with TSOs. TSOs represent 47,000 of 64,000 people in TSA. It makes sense to start with the largest population, but we would go through the other communities of interest within the agency because we want to develop expertise and provide known career paths. Not to say that you have a career path out there, not everybody follows that path, but it is a guide for people to use in their own career planning, and it's a good guide for supervisors to counsel and coach people and mentor them. Pat, anything you want to add? Okay, thanks.
When do you anticipate the LEFAM's roadmap will be published, and what is your vision for our future state?
Yeah, LEFAM's roadmap, one of the things that I did on this trip that I just came back from is I met with the Chicago field office team, had a really good discussion on the roadmap. Director Stevenson had been out there just recently, had a similar discussion with them. We are in the final stages of putting that roadmap into implementation. Don't have a date for that, Brian. Do you have a date for that yet? Okay. Okay. So we're still working it through the final approvals here in headquarters, and also making sure that other parties external to TSA are aware of what we're going to do before we implement it. I think it's a really great path forward. The feedback I've received from federal air marshals is generally very, very positive as well. Let me just talk for just a second on the Federal Air Marshal Service. One of the jewels in the TSA crown is the Federal Air Marshal Service. They're the law enforcement element of this organization, and they've done incredible work over the past 20 years in providing in-flight security. They will always do in-flight security. There are other things that they can do to develop stronger relationships with Joint Terrorism Task Force, for example, or any other entity that's operating in a major city or nationally, so that we can share information across state and federal and local law enforcement agencies. We are also more and more concerned about different threat vectors that are developing because the threat has never remained constant. It's not remaining constant today. It's very much there, and we want to be able to apply that law enforcement expertise, that law enforcement presence, and the benefit from law enforcement relationships that federal air marshals always have had. So, I look forward to further integrating the Federal Air Marshal Service into our TSA operations. We did a really good job back about 4 years ago in making sure that our in-flight security was mirroring our checkpoint security, so that if we provided additional security to a passenger based on risk in our checkpoint, we followed up with parallel operations in in-flight security. I think that's been very successful. I really appreciate the FAM's flexibility in putting that new ConOps in place. This is just the next step in the progression. And the other thing that I would note is that, hey, a roadmap is a guide, and it will have an implementation plan attached to it. We will run it for a good number of years and see how it works. We always reserve the right to come back and to say, hey, we thought this would work, and it has, but maybe it hasn't worked quite as well as we anticipated, and so we'll, again, coordinate with our federal air marshals and figure out what a good path is forward. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to open it back up to the room before I ask the last question. Going once.
How about from the Human Capital Advisory Group? Anybody besides, Aaron, you had your chance. Anybody in one of the other FSDs want to come up and?
All right,
Okay, good.
Thank you, sir. Mark Lundby out of the great state of Wisconsin. Go Pack, go. So I just want to lean over to the administrator and say thank you for continuing another 5 years with this contract. I want to thank your family for the support.
Thanks.
Hopefully that's shared with you here in headquarters, because in the field that news was overwhelming. So thank you, sir.
Thanks, Mark. No, I appreciate it. And I'm not done yet. I've got, as you've seen, and Alexa and her team have put out clips of the 2 confirmation hearings that I've had. The Senate, the Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee, which is our primary committee of jurisdiction in the Senate, voted me out of committee yesterday. But I still have to go on the Senate floor and get voted on the Senate floor, and we don't know what the timing of that is going to be, because the Senate's in session just next week before they go for their August recess. So I'm hopeful, but we're not done with the process yet. But I appreciate all the support I've gotten from everyone at TSA, and as you've heard me say in the confirmation hearings, the reason I want to do another 5 years is because I really get a lot of personal satisfaction in working with all of you and seeing the great work that you do, and stepping back and saying, okay, what can we do here in headquarters to further enable you to do the great work that not just you're doing today, but that we anticipate you're going to have to do in the next 5 to 10 years. The other thing is that I think it's really important that we continue to be very mindful of how we're positioning the agency in the public's eye. I want the public to view us as, hey, TSA does a fantastic job with security. I feel safe and secure whenever I board an aircraft because of the work that the TSA does, knowing full well that there's a whole bunch of things that we do that most people don't even realize are part of our aviation security operations. And then additionally, all the work that we've now started really in the regulatory realm, although we've always worked with the surface transportation modes, but there's a lot of really good work we're doing in surface to make sure that when somebody gets on a bus, when somebody rides a transit system, when somebody rides Amtrak, when we rely on goods to get from the Gulf Coast to the Midwest on freight rail, that's done safely and securely. And the threats that we're facing, as I mentioned, are not just threats that can be affected from within the domestic United States. These threats that we're concerned about now, particularly on the surface side and to a degree on the aviation side, can be launched from anywhere in the world. So we really, we've done some groundbreaking work on that, and we will do more without question. So thanks very much, and thanks everybody for your participation in this town hall this afternoon, but most of all, thanks very much for the great work you do day in and day out, all day long. This agency never stops. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. This concludes today's conference call. You may disconnect at this time. Speakers, I have you in the post-conference. Denise, are you there?